Welcome to the least exciting episode of Fixing Attack of the Clones. It's great to be here. I think the biggest problem with the movie is the romance subplot, which people say comes down to the chemistry or the acting. Now, I've not heard them say that, but they could say that. If we just imagine that people do say that, then that'll make me seem smarter by comparison. Really, it comes down to the writing and the editing.
Who talks like this, George? We're the ones that are going to get vegetables thrown at us.
The pacing and structural issues that I dealt with already affect the romance just as much, because an audience knows what a movie romance should look like, so when it doesn't look like that, it seems off. I'm not going to spend too much time on that here. You can watch the previous two videos and just swap the examples in your head. And that will get me the views. What I do want to get into is reworking the content. Now, more than ever, we're diving headfirst into 10 minutes of subjective conjecture. So prepare your angry comments. We already dealt with their introduction in the last video because that took forever to explain, so I snuck it in there. But overall, this opening section does a good job of showing us why this relationship shouldn't work, which would be good if it felt like it should work, but since it doesn't work, showing us that it shouldn't work doesn't work. I've noticed this annoying look I do after I say something convoluted. I'm not like gloating about how clever I am, I'm just trying to work out if I have to do another take. There's this idea that Anakin's organized with Padme to use her as bait. She's gonna sleep out in the open with the security off. He's gonna sense when she's in danger, jump in the room, wave his lightsaber around, catch the assassin and find out that it's a monster. And worse, a girl. Which is nice. It shows them working together as an effective team. Except George Lucas couldn't decide if that was what he was doing. Did Padme turn off the security because it was part of this plan, or was it because...
I don't think she liked me watching her.
One of those things makes them seem like an effective unit, the other makes him seem like an insane creep. The reason it was in there, and the reason for a lot of the other awful dialogue throughout this section, is to set up Anakin's Act 2. He's telling the audience, I'm gonna go do a romance subplot with Padme, and then I'll save my mum, and I'll be going against the rules of the Jedi Council. So all of these awful lines like
just being around her again is intoxicating.
Are tragically kind of crucial setup. But through this section there's also a lot of unnecessary world-building dialogue, which they try to blast through by cutting away to Padme and slapping a low pass on it. Now I'm removing that stuff anyway for pace, which means that I can take this crucial but embarrassing dialogue and slap a low pass on that instead.
I'd much rather dream about Padme. Just being around her again is intoxicating.
And just streamlining this puts the focus onto that crucial dialogue while I can desperately try and cover up those bad line reads. In the writing, all the subtext that George wanted to this relationship, all the doom and tension and incompatibility is text. They say it in their dialogue, which just makes them seem doomed and tense and incompatible. The core tension, which is a good tension, is that Anakin can't be in a relationship because of the rules of the Volcel Council, and by extension Padme can't be because it would be bad optics. Now George keeps piling new tensions on top of this, an age difference, fascism, Anakin's an awkward little freak, which is okay. Logically those extra tensions make sense. The problem is, once the characters start vocalizing them, it tells the audience that these are big problems that are going to stop this relationship from ever working. I'm sure it's meant to be in there, but I think it being such a focus of the movie is just a side effect of George's genius dialogue.
I like this. If only we can get some of the dialogue altered.
So it really needs a rewrite, but I don't have access to Hayden Christensen, Natalie Portman, and a green screen, so I'm a bit limited in what I can do. What I've landed on is to push it to the opposite extreme. All I can do is remove dialogue, and I fucking have. But the scenes don't end up drastically shorter because she can say,
Anakin, you've grown up.
And then they look at each other for 15 seconds. And he can say,
You haven't changed a bit.
And then they look at each other for 15 seconds. Which, in my opinion, is better than the alternative.
You're exactly the way I remember you in my dreams.
But the idea is to convey romance through the language of filmmaking in a very slow and deliberate way, so the audience has time to read those tensions into it. So it is very stylistically extreme, but it works, and I think it is the best option. We keep the idea of that tension and we make it a more believable romance just by removing that dialogue and letting the audience fill in the blanks. And Anakin doesn't need to complain about Obi-Wan.
He's overly critical. He never listens. It's not fair.
Once they arrive on Naboo, we've really started the romance subplot proper. So naturally we launch into 2 back-to-back exposition scenes, which have obviously been extremely trimmed down to the point that they're very jarring to watch, and they don't really advance the romance plot at all. In fact, the palace scene largely exists to explain why they're going to spend the next half hour in extremely beautiful locations, which is a ridiculous premise that becomes less believable the more you try to explain it. So I did try some versions reworking those scenes, but ultimately I've dropped them in favor of this deleted scene where we meet Padme's parents. It's a little clunky and I've had to make a lot of tweaks to it, but it does give us some moments where Padme genuinely shows an interest in Anakin, which easy mistake to make, forgetting to add even a hint of mutual attraction to your love story. Then we go into the kiss and then the picnic, which is a very jarring order. Structurally, we know the kiss should be the midpoint. And even if you didn't know that, just pretend that you did. It should be very easy. I'll have no way of verifying it either way. So if we structure it parents' house, picnic, kiss, that should give the audience a little more time to get on board and allow things to develop a little more naturally, which means that by the time we get to the kiss scene, it reads very differently. Plus, instead of hating sand, they just stare at each other for 15 seconds. It's perfect. It's the perfect relationship. So if the kiss is the midpoint of this subplot, and even though it's subversive and nowhere near the middle of the movie, it is the point where Anakin's closest to reaching his goal, so I'd call that a high midpoint. Then we want to drop down to a low point so that by the time we hit the end, we can end on a high note, and that will be incredibly satisfying. Now I've been kind of removing all of the conflict and tension from this plot, but now it's important that we do see the actual tension. Narratively, at this point, that should rise to the surface and there should be an actual confrontation, which exists. And because I've been trimming out all of these peripheral tensions, it's pretty clear and focused. We've been slowly building this singular tension that Anakin loves Padme, but he can't because of the Jedi. Before, this scene landed as a disastrous argument that destroyed their relationship, but now it just makes sense. I just need to make sure that it keeps that same focus and clarity and tone. So I really had to fuck up this scene. I'm merging takes and replacing their faces and doing morphs on their faces to make it look like they're saying dialogue that never belonged together. It gets so drastic here that I've had to replace the music, record new breaths, new shuffling, the fire, but I really want it to be tasteful, so I've tried to hide all my changes behind J-cuts and L-cuts. With access to the original footage, I wouldn't have to do this at all. I could just use the coverage that they clearly shot, but I'm just limited. They should upload all the raw footage of the prequels. I would honestly subscribe to Disney Plus for a month, and that's my final offer. And Anakin doesn't need to complain about Obi-Wan.
If Master Obi-Wan caught me doing this, he'd be very grumpy.
Now we abandon this subplot in favor of our D plot. Really, Anakin says, alright, that's enough of this now, let's go save my mum. The Tatooine stuff doesn't belong in this movie, so it's very jarring to get into and out of, but there's not really anything I can do. The best way in and out is just to power through quick as you can and hope that no one notices. The one thing I want to look at here is this garage scene. Now, it's not actually part of the romance, but all my fixes here are done in service of that subplot. For the purposes of the greater Star Wars story, Anakin needs a scene unpacking his dark side. The problem is this is a scene between Anakin and Padme, which I think, is a classic dating mistake, admitting to a mass murder. If I was just fixing the romance, this scene wouldn't be happening, but obviously it needs to. So the idea here is that I'll remove a lot of his anger and let it play as remorse.
I killed them.
The movie puts quite a bit of effort into not showing it and dehumanizing the Tusken Raiders and preparing us to accept Anakin's murdering, only to have him pull it all away and go, I killed all the women and children and I wish I could keep doing it. So if I just remove all that stuff, that should let the audience go, oh yeah, fair enough. Then he teleports across the garage. That's not my bad, that's the George Lucas original. And he doesn't need to complain about Obi-Wan.
It's all Obi-Wan's fault. He's holding me back.
Then there's just a couple scenes left, and all there is to do is remove a bit of dialogue and let John Williams carry us. I'll do some kind of release in a week or so, and I want to do a write-up of everything that I didn't have time to get into. I tried to make all my changes in service of narrative and pace and emotional investment and audience expectation. But obviously at the end of the day it comes down to taste, so that might not work for you, but my hope is that that's kind of the existing story told as well as possible. As always, this is all just my opinion, but I've never been wrong. That's it. Attack of the Clones is fixed. Fuck you.